do it on this computer, and then I'll send it out later. Okay, recording in progress. Okay.
So yeah, I have like 3 different protocols, but let me just check them to see, because you don't really need the FRAS rinsate protocols. So let's see. Da, da, da. And I can send you these, but it's pretty simple. So basically the first thing that you need to do is, which is kind of tedious, is organizing all your tubes and labeling them. And in the protocol, I say like how many you need. So you're probably going to be doing the combo of 8 beetles, I'm sure, because I think that's all that were collected.
Yeah.
So even though you have, your samples have 8 beetles in them, you have to homogenize all of the beetles individually. So you're going to need a homogenizer tube, which are the tubes that have like the silica beads in them.
Okay.
You're going to need one of those for each beetle. So I'm trying to think how many I typically did at a time. So it's one of these deals where you start off with a ton of beetles, you homogenize them, you extract the supernatant, and then you end up combining them down. So even though it looks kind of intimidating to start with like a lot of samples, it's better to do that, because then at the end, after you combine them, you have to do these series of steps, and it's like all you get is, like 3 tubes or something. So I think I typically did 6 vials per session.
Okay.
And that took me, I don't know, a couple hours, I think. So I can send you also, I have the protocol, but I can also send you like a visualization of how to set up the actual tubes, because, that's something that you might want to do it different than I did, but just having kind of a template to start with, because basically, you have your tube rack, right? And I would set up like, so it wouldn't get too crowded. To do 6 samples, I would get 2 of those, and I'd set up a homogenizer tube for each beetle. So I'd have like 8 tubes, and then I'd go a couple rows down, do another 8, couple rows down, do another 8, and then I'd do that with the second tube. And so you get those set up, you get them labeled on the top, and we're not going to end up saving those tubes, so you don't have to label them. Just label them a way that's fast, that you know what they are. So you'll end up needing one of those per beetle, and then you need to set up the microcentrifuge tubes. And let's see, you need this. You're going to need actually 2 of those per beetle. So you'll need 2 sets. Just trying to think if that's right. So you're going to go through homogenize the beetle. So you have your homogenization tube. To get the beetles into there, what I usually do, and this is in the protocol, is I basically set up Kim wipes for each vial, and I open the vial and I kind of, use the cap to keep the beetles inside, but drain out the ethanol into like a beaker or something. I definitely do it into a beaker, because sometimes one might fall out and it's just easier to grab. Whereas if it's in the sink, it could be gone
It's
forever.
gone forever.
Yeah. So I just do that in a beaker, and drain off as much as you can, and then dump the beetles onto a Kim wipe and sort of separate them a little bit out because we basically just want the ethanol to evaporate as much as possible. So I'll do that for like 6 vials, right? And then you basically let those sit for about 10 minutes. And then to get the beetles into the homogenization tube, because we don't really, we don't want to use forceps because we don't want contamination in case there were spores on the outside. So what I would always do is I would just kind of scoop them into the vial just using my finger and kind of pop them in. And I don't think the risk of contamination is very high because there really
Yeah.
shouldn't be a lot of spores on the outside at all. So I would just do that, kind of scoop them in there. Keep them, in order, because having a good template for where you put them will help you figure out if something gets messed up, kind of what's what. But in reality, it doesn't really matter. Among the 8 from a vial, it doesn't matter because all of that DNA is going to get combined. But you just want to make sure that you're not mixing up beetles between vials, right?
Yep.
So you get the beetle in the homogenization tube, then you add the homogenization buffer, which comes with the kit, 500 microliters of that into each tube. Then you just close it and then you put it into the tissue homogenous, the bead ruptor, however you want to say it.
Okay.
And with that, so I don't know if you've used that at all, but basically on the machine, it has this little tube holder that sits on it. And then you have this cap that kind of keeps the tubes down. So you unscrew the top part, the cap or whatever, and then you can take that off and you can add the tubes in there.
Okay.
And then when you put the cap of that on, you don't need to tighten it like super tight. Basically, sometimes you can hear a little click, but it can be hard to hear sometimes. So you basically just need to kind of tighten it enough so it's secure, but don't tighten it down like all the way. So I
Okay.
would just kind of like try tightening and see if you can hear the little click. It's like some kind of spring goes off and it should be fine.
Okay. Hold on. Let me go test it.
Okay.
I didn't really hear any clicking sounds, but I kind of got a sense of like how tight it needed to be to like stay on.
Yeah, it just doesn't, it's just important that you don't like tighten it all the way so it's super tight.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
Now on the protocol, and I'm just reading through it and kind of making sure it's right. I have like numbers for if you were doing 3 vials, but if you wanted to do, which maybe starting with 3 would be good. But I think, I would typically, when I was doing this like full time, I would do 6 samples in one run, and then in the afternoon, I'd do another 6. So I was able to get an entire site done per day,
Okay.
12 reps. But, you might not want to start off doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the protocol, it says the setting. So the actual default for the homogenizer is I think pretty close. So We homogenize at 4 meters per second, which is the default setting, for 30 seconds. The only thing you have to change is that we do 2 rounds of 30 seconds.
Okay.
So I forget what it looks like on there, but you just go through the settings and just add another cycle. It should be
Mm-hmm.
pretty quick. The touchscreen on that's a little laggy,
Mm.
so just, be patient with it.
Okay.
So then so it's going to shake them up after a minute, right, or so. I think there's like a 10-second break between each of the cycles. Then you kind of have to visually inspect the tubes. You shouldn't see any big pieces of beetles anymore. It should look kind of like a slurry. So you'll
Okay.
see little chunks of exoskeleton and stuff, which is fine. Sometimes if you forget to put the homogenization fluid in, which will happen, you'll see just a bunch of bubbles.
Okay.
So just kind of inspect them and make sure there's no obvious problems. I don't think I've ever had, in all the samples I've done, I've only had maybe 1 or 2 where the beetle was just really big and I
Mhm.
had to do it again to homogenize it. But if you see that, just run that tube again. Make sure you balance it out though,
Yeah.
because it is
Mhm.
kind of like a centrifuge. All right, so after you do that, you just put those tubes into the centrifuge and mix them down. And and then you're essentially going to pipette out the liquid on top, the
Mhm.
supernatant fluid, and you're going to put that into a microcentrifuge tube
Okay.
for each individual beetle. Um, that can be a little bit tricky because you want to try really to not get any of the particulate matter in there.
Mhm.
Um, so you want to try and get as much as you can. I would say I would definitely try to get all the liquid out and risk getting a little bit of the pellet in there,
Mhm.
because that shouldn't be a huge problem. But you'll get good at doing this after you do it a lot. You just kind of hold the tube up so you can see where the boundary is, and
Mhm.
you just pipette it out, slowly. And then as it gets lower, I kind of move the tip towards the pellet and just try, the best you can.
Right.
So that goes into a tube. Um, Obviously, an important thing with doing this is making sure you're switching out tips anytime you're going between samples.
Right.
If you're adding um, reagents to tubes, as long as you don't touch the liquid, you can use the same tube, but just be cognizant of that. And
Mhm.
I think I have it listed on the protocol, like when to make sure to use a new tip. Um, so you basically do that for all your samples. So, and then the homogenization tubes you can just throw out
Okay.
at that point. Um, And then this is when we combine all of the supernatants from 8 beetles into one.
Yeah. Just a question.
Mhm.
So we do it in 2 cycles because we want to extract as much supernatant as possible first, and then only extract 30 microliters later.
No, so you're just going to collect the supernatant once.
Okay.
So you're going to homogenize them, centrifuge them down, and then collect the supernatant just one time.
Okay. So why do we like I thought okay, because I thought you said that the supernatant gets put into a separate microcentrifuge tube for each beetle that you ran.
Mhm.
Um, and then are you supposed to take supernate from each of those tubes to then combine?
Yes, so then basically once you have all the 8 supernatants, you're going to label another tube, a separate tube, that's going to you're going to take 30 microliters of each of your 8 tubes and combine it into that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then we usually, I mean, I have been keeping the individual 8.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think we've ever had to go back and like reanalyze it because at the end, we're going to get backups also. But I've
Mm-hmm.
just been keeping it, which is annoying because it actually takes up a lot of space.
Yeah.
You can ask Vera about that. Maybe keep them for a while until we get qPCR done, and then once that's done, they can probably be thrown out. But
Mm-hmm.
just to be safe, you can keep those. So then that's essentially where you go from, let's say if you did 3 vials, you'd have 24 individual tubes, right? Because 8 for
Mm-hmm.
each beetle. That all gets condensed down into basically 3 tubes, right?
Okay.
Once you combine the supernates. And then at that point, we do an RNAs. So that comes with the kit. You just have to add 5 microliters
Mm-hmm.
of RNAs to each tube and make sure you mix it. And then it goes in the incubator for, let's see, 15 minutes.
Okay.
I have had issues with the RNAs in the past where like there'll be some kind of precipitate in it. And I don't really know what's caused that, but um, I just try and keep it in the fridge and store it in the fridge before you use it and just kind of mix it as well as you can.
Okay.
I don't know why that ever happened, but it seemed to work regardless. It's
That's
just that I would have trouble if I was sucking it up. Sometimes I'd get some crystals or whatever it was in there stuck in the thing and it wouldn't suck up properly, but hopefully you won't have that problem. So those sit in the incubator for 15 minutes. And then after that, we have to add isopropanol to basically stop the reaction.
okay.
And that should be kept, the isopropanol should be mixed up in a tube and kept in the freezer, stored in the freezer so that when you add it, it's cold.
Okay.
Or actually, no, 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 wait.
Oh,
I don't think the isopropanol has to be cold. I would just keep it in the fridge. Yeah. And the isopropanol you just can purchase. You don't have to mix it up. You can just buy it how it is.
okay.
But I usually pour it in a small vial because it's just easier to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep that in the fridge. So the amount you add, it says you should add 7/10 of the volume for the sample you have, but typically I just add the same amount because we don't really get a ton of variation in terms of how much liquid we're getting out of each beetle.
Mm-hmm.
So it says on here, um, I usually would add about 168 microliters because typically the sample volume we have is about 240 or something.
Okay.
Um, that should be plenty.
Okay.
And then you stick those in the freezer for 15 minutes. So that's a little bit of downtime that you have kind of in the middle of the process because you have 15 minutes in the incubator. Add the isopropanol. That's another one where like you shouldn't have to add change tips. You should just be able to kind of put it in on the side.
Mm.
Um, Mix it or invert it. In the instructions, it doesn't say to, but it seems weird to me, so I just always inverted it. And
Okay.
then put it in the freezer for 15 minutes. And then at that point, it's basically where we start doing the filtering through the other kinds of columns you have, the spin columns.
Mm-hmm.
So you transfer the solution from the tube into a spin column. So spin columns are another set of tubes that you have to basically
Oh,
get together and label
sorry. Give me just a
at the
moment. Vera's calling.
okay.
Hey, Vera. Yeah, we're in the meeting right now. Okay. Yeah, no problem. Mm-hmm. Were there any questions you wanted us to ask specifically about the procedure or just, okay, she hung up. Fantastic. Okay. Like, before you go, can I ask a question? And it was like, no, you can't. Okay. So, oh, I think I had a question.
Mhm.
Um, actually, the question can wait a little bit. You can finish whatever you were saying before.
Well, so basically after this step, we've RNAs the samples, meaning we've hopefully degraded the RNA so that all we have is DNA. And this is where like the nanodrop samples that you've been measuring, if this step isn't done properly, you can get a bad result from those 60, 80 readings.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to remember there's also proteins in there too.
Yeah.
So, I tend to think that the RNAs is fine. And even if that ratio is a little off, it's probably fine. I
Mm-hmm.
really don't think that these samples are likely to be degraded, but it's one of those where you just have to cover your ass and like do the measurement to make the reviewers happy, kind of.
Yep.
So at this point, we just start filtering through the spin column. And the spin column is the filter that sits. So you have the spin column's like a 2 mil rounded bottom tube, and then you put in a little filter that like sits in there.
Okay.
Have you seen those in the
I've never
bags?
used one before.
Okay,
So,
well, sometimes they'll come apart, but it's really just a little filter thing that sits inside there, clicks in there. Um, and we're gonna put the solution into there. When you pipette it in there, it's just gonna sit on the top layer, but then we're gonna centrifuge it so that it moves the liquid through, and the DNA should get stuck on that filter.
okay.
So we basically move the solution through, and then we have to wash it a couple times with ethanol. So you're just going to transfer your solution in your tube that you just RNAs, put it into an individual spin column for each vial, and then you're going to centrifuge that. Let's see, 8,000 um, gravity for 2 minutes to move the solution through. Um, Make sure to check that all the solution goes through. This is where, like, if you have any of that particulate matter from the initial transfer, it could block the filter and it could cause problems. I've never really had a problem, but you'll be able to see the liquid in the bottom and just kind of like visually look at it.
Okay.
And then you're going to wash the filter. So you're going to add cold ethanol.
Mm-hmm.
So you should have a vial of 70% ethanol in the fridge.
Okay.
Sorry, in the freezer. I just keep it in there instead of putting it on ice because it's just a short walk. You're going to add 250 microliters of ethanol to that tube, centrifuge it again. Um, and then let me just see here. Discard filter, wash. Okay, so at this point, you're we're not going to have enough room in that tube to do another wash, so it's kind of annoying. After you do the first ethanol wash, you basically have to lift the filter off and dump the tube out into a beaker, trash beaker. And
Okay.
then I always like to dab it on a Kim wipe just to get any excess off the side of the tube, put the filter back on, and then do another wash.
Okay.
Um, and it's important to make sure that all the ethanol gets pushed through
Mm-hmm.
because that'll cause problems when we try and do the final elution. So
Okay.
just kind of make sure. I haven't had a lot of issues with that at all, so shouldn't be a problem. But
Mm-hmm.
essentially, you wash the filter twice with cold ethanol. At that point, we have all our DNA in the filter, so we just take the top part of that, the filter part, and we set it into a clean microcentrifuge tube. So another set of tubes. So you see all
Okay.
the like tubes you have to kind of prepare ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that one, the final set of those tubes, you want to make sure you label with all the information because that's the one that we're going to end up saving.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then the way that we basically just get the DNA off the filter and into the tube is we add the TE buffer.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so we do this on a mistake in the protocol. So we add 100 microliters of TE buffer to the tube. You centrifuge it. and then we add another 100 microliters. So we basically do another 2 steps to draw the TE buffer through, bring the DNA down with it.
Okay.
And then you're pretty much done. You have your sample. So in the end, you should have about 200 microliters. In terms of sending me samples from that, what I did is at this point, I labeled another set of tubes and I put, God, I'm trying to think how much I sent Yoshiko. I think it was only like 20 microliters that I transferred to another tube. And that's a tube you'll be sending me, and then you can keep the other one as a backup in
Okay.
case we have to redo qPCR or something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's written, but I think 20 microliters is right. I'll make sure to check.
Okay. That's what we have on our copy of the protocol,
Okay.
so I think it's probably
Yeah,
right.
then that should be right.
Although this is from like 2022, so I don't, that's why I was like, I don't know if things have changed in the process.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's changed really. It's just that when I had other types of samples, I had to, change some of the things, but the
Okay.
general one should be the same.
Okay. And do we have to discard the filter after we do the final wash with the tea buffer, or does it just sit in the microcentrifuge
Yeah,
tank?
you throw that away.
Okay.
Mhm. So if you want to put that in
Yeah.
there. And then you just store them in -20 or -80. I don't think we have a -80. So
Yeah, the lowest it goes is -40, I think.
yeah. So just stick them in there in a box. In those styrofoam things, have you seen those? That's what
Yeah.
I use. And yeah, that's pretty much it for extractions.
Okay. All right. Is the process any different for doing the single beetles? You just like,
The single beetles, no, it's just that you just don't combine them. So
okay.
you just carry out, obviously then you're going to have a lot more um like spin tubes and things to label because you're not condensing them down. But otherwise it's exactly the same.
Okay. I don't know if we're doing any of the single beetles, but just covering our bases, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean you can always ask me if you end up having questions. Really the trickiest thing is just kind of knowing how to set it up in the beginning
Mm-hmm.
and how to organize your tubes and like label them all. Um, and then, like I said, when you decant off the ethanol, I just dump all them into a Kim wipe that I have set up on the counter. I
Mm-hmm.
usually put some of that bench paper underneath it
Okay.
just so that it absorbs the ethanol and just kind of make sure the beetles aren't touching, kind of separate them because it'll help the evaporation go faster.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just kind of like learn to bop them in the homogenization tubes. I will say you have to be careful with that because if you tilt those tubes too far, the silica will fall out. So
Okay.
it's something that you just kind of have to mess around with.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's pretty straightforward. The only tricky thing, like I said, is when you decant off the supernatant, it takes a little skill. Like I trained oh, what was his name? There was another student we hired
Hmm.
who was older. He had been like in, I think, George Heimpel's lab forever, and super nice guy, but like he couldn't see very well.
Oh.
So doing that step, like he could not do it because he would always just jam the tip into the pellet and he'd take out like big chunks of it.
Oh.
And I was just like, okay. So, it's something that it takes a little bit of skill, but I'm
Mhm.
sure you'll be fine.
Okay.
It just
All
takes
right.
practice, really. And
Yeah.
it's not the end of the world. Like I said, if you do get some of the pellet in there,
Mm-hmm.
it just could cause problems with the filtering because it could get stuck on the filter.
Right.
Uh, so I think it's more important to try and get as much of that supernatant as you can because if you don't, you're missing DNA potentially, right? I also have to train um my grad student here on how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can we could film that like with a camera
Yeah.
if that would be helpful. I just don't know when we're gonna have time to do that. Well, because we don't have any samples for one.
Right.
Until you guys send us samples. And also, if you have any just old samples or just beetles that are in ethanol,
Mm-hmm.
could you send us some? Because I need basically samples for her to practice on. And like
Okay.
I didn't collect any beetles this year, so if you just have any, it doesn't need, they don't have to be good quality or anything. It's just something that she can go through the process
Yeah, we have a lot
with.
of duplicates
Okay.
for a lot of our sites. So we could probably send some that, weren't completed sets. So
I
Okay.
also have a bunch from 2022 that we
yeah.
probably don't need anymore.
Yeah, even those old ones. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I'll talk to Vera
but like
about
we
which ones.
okay.
Yeah, I feel
Um,
like we have tons that we could send. I'll just ask her like which ones like she doesn't care about.
right.
Okay.
But like I said, that won't be, you'll probably be starting this, I'm assuming sooner.
Yeah, I
Then
think
we could probably get you that video, but
mhm. think Vera
if you
wants
have
to start
issues, we
it.
can film it and
Yeah.
probably should anyway, just for future training, just to
Hmm.
have like a video is helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Okay.
Um, Kieran, did you have any questions?
I missed
Any
them.
other questions?
Okay.
Maybe I'll have some after for you.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the
I never
protocols.
trained you how to do this, Karen.
No, we never did
No,
that.
we never got
We did
around to
that
it.
with Miss
Yeah.
mostly, I think.
Okay. Yeah, it's I mean honestly it's pretty easy. It's just like following a recipe.
Yeah.
Mm.
But the thing is there's so many opportunities for mistakes, like labeling mistakes because it's a lot of like repetitious,
Hmm.
things. That's why I always like to keep them in a same orientation because if I do mess up a label, I can backtrack and be like, oh, okay, well that was here, so it must be this one.
Right.
Um, but like I said, between the 8 beetles in a sample, it doesn't matter. You mislabel one, if you move one that you labeled as 3 to 4, it doesn't matter. It's all getting combined in the end. So,
Okay.
and obviously make sure to wear gloves. I always clean down the bench with 70% ethanol. Um, you can put down bench paper. I
Hmm.
just didn't like it because it could be kind of bulky or like taping it down just took too long. And it's like if you keep that surface clean, it's easier to clean. So,
Hmm.
um,
Did
yeah.
you and whoever you were doing this with previously, did you autoclave all of your like materials beforehand?
No, I never did because I would just try and buy the micro centrifuge tubes. I would just buy them sterile.
Okay.
I mean, I know that in Dave's lab they did that, but I just didn't really see the point because um there really shouldn't be any nucleases in there that's going to break down the DNA.
Hmm.
And we're not really storing them in there, so but you definitely can. I mean, Anne Fallon kind of runs the autoclave and
Yeah.
she won't let anyone actually autoclave things, like she has to do it. But she is pretty fast. Like if you put the stuff you want in there on the tray, like she will get it done that day, but it's just sort of like I don't know, like an extra
Okay.
step. So I just tried to buy um tubes that were sterile. Try to
Hmm.
buy like tips that are sterile. If you can just buy all that stuff so that it's sterile and you don't leave the bag open, right?
Hmm.
It should be fine.
Okay. All right. Julie, did you have any outstanding questions? No. Okay. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I think that's all I had. Uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, just let me know. I mean, if you run into any issues.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carrie. This was very helpful.
Gary.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Yeah, it's too bad I couldn't like have it in front of me, and
Yeah.
even
don't
I
know what
had to like
do without
remember.
beetles.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
All right.
All right, I'll
Well,
talk to Vera about sending you those practice beetles, and the video.
okay. Yeah, I have to email her anyway because I have to see about ordering some other supplies. So, all right. See ya.
All right, thank you. Bye.